My name is Michael. I'm 35, live in the Richmond suburbs, and for most of my adult life, I've chosen the quiet road, the reliable road. I work as a data analyst for a mid-sized insurance company. My days are numbers, spreadsheets, systems that make sense. No surprises. That's how I like it. 5 years ago, I married Olivia. She was different from me in every possible way, social, magnetic, creative to a fault. While I double-checked formulas and debugged reports, she chased freelance marketing gigs and curated an Instagram feed like her life depended on it. She had that kind of shine people noticed, especially when we walked into a room together. At first, I felt lucky. Later, I started wondering if I just looked like her plus one. Still, we worked. Or at least I thought we did. Our lives intertwined in all the typical suburban ways. Shared grocery lists, date nights every other Friday, disagreements over what color to paint the kitchen. But underneath that routine, something must have been shifting long before I caught it. Like a crack under the surface that you only see once the whole thing finally gives. It was a Friday night in early March when everything changed. I remember it down to the jacket I was wearing. A tan Harrington she'd bought me for my birthday, still with the tag inside. She had asked me to come with her to a networking event. Small industry thing, she said. More like a mixer. You won't even have to talk to anyone. Just be there. At the time, Olivia was trying to pivot from small freelance projects into something more stable, branding, digital campaigns, maybe PR work. She said the people she was meeting were movers. The kind who could open doors. I didn't understand half of what she meant, but I wanted to support her. That's what you do when you're married. You show up. So I said yes. The club was downtown, all chrome and violet neon, with a velvet rope and a valet who looked barely old enough to drive. The kind of place I'd usually walk past without a second glance. Olivia was buzzing from the moment we stepped inside. One of those rare nights where she looked exactly like the version of herself she showed online. High heels, deep red lipstick, gold hoops. She had a way of commanding space without even trying. Inside, the music was so loud it blurred the edges of conversation. Everyone looked beautiful in a curated, champagne and filtered light sort of way. Olivia greeted people by name or username, and I was introduced once or twice as my husband, Michael, before being left near the bar like luggage. I told myself it was fine, that I was here for her, that I didn't need to be part of whatever this scene was. I found a quiet spot off to the side and watched. For a while, she mingled like she always did, animated, bright, always in motion. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but she laughed often, touched people's arms when she talked. She was magnetic in a way I had stopped trying to compete with years ago. And then I saw him, tall, lean, tan like he'd just come from a week in Miami. Dark shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, watch that probably cost more than my car payment. He leaned in when he talked to her. She tilted her head just slightly when she laughed. A move I had seen before, once meant for me. It wasn't just conversation. There was a current running between them, like they were on a different frequency than everyone else in the room. Then they moved to the dance floor. It wasn't crowded. Just dim lights and a slow beat that pulsed through the floor. They danced close. Too close. His hand found her waist with the kind of familiarity that didn't come from a first meeting. Not the kind of contact you'd make at a professional event. Her arm was draped behind his neck, fingers grazing the collar of his shirt. I watched for 5 full seconds before I could move. When I finally walked up, it wasn't because I wanted to make a scene. I just needed her to see me, to snap out of whatever fantasy she was floating in. I tapped her shoulder. She turned and looked at me like I was the one out of place. "What?" she said, not even hiding the annoyance in her voice. Not surprise, not guilt, just that flat, irritated tone you'd use if someone interrupted a good song. I tried to keep my voice level. "Can I talk to you for a second?" She sighed, turned to the guy, said something in his ear, then followed me a few steps away. Her arms crossed. "Seriously, Michael? What are you doing?" I looked at her. "You're dancing with him like he's your date." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh my God. Are you serious? It's just dancing. Don't be that guy." "That guy? The jealous one?" she said, shaking her head. God, you've got to chill. This is literally work. Networking. You think I'm here for fun? I opened my mouth to respond but stopped. Because I realized something. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a performance. She wasn't embarrassed. She was bothered. Like my presence was ruining her story. I'm going home, I said quietly. Great, she replied. Maybe next time. Don't come if you can't handle it. She turned and walked back toward the dance floor, not even glancing back. I stood there for a minute, not sure whether to be angry or numb. The bartender placed a fresh drink in front of me, assuming I was staying. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. And that's when I looked down and realized I'd taken off my wedding ring. I hadn't even felt myself doing it. It was just there, lying on the counter beside my untouched drink, shining under the purple LED lights like some silent verdict. Something had cracked open inside me, and I couldn't put it back. Not tonight. When I got home, Olivia wasn't far behind. She came in about 20 minutes later, humming to herself like the night had been a success. When she saw me on the couch, she rolled her eyes. Still mad? She asked. I didn't answer, just looked at her. She plopped down into the chair across from me, kicked off her heels. Okay, look, you seriously need to stop making this about you. It was one dance. With a potential client, by the way. If you can't trust me to be professional, then that's on you. I tried to explain what I saw, what it looked like, what it felt like, but she was already shaking her head. This is exactly why I didn't want you there. You're too emotional about this stuff. You embarrassed me, Michael. You looked like a jealous kid. I don't know what I expected. Maybe some regret, an apology, anything. Instead, she made it my fault. And I let her. I nodded, said maybe I had misread things. Maybe I was being possessive. After all, what did I know about her world? We went to bed in silence. She fell asleep easily, like the night had been a success. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the ghost of my wedding ring on my finger. I told myself it was just a bump, just one of those marital miscommunications. But in the quiet, I already knew. Something had shifted, and this time it wasn't going back. After that night at the club, I told myself I was overreacting. I let Olivia's words replay in my head. You're too emotional. It was just a dance. You embarrassed me. At the time, I swallowed it. I convinced myself that maybe I was too sensitive, too rigid, too unfamiliar with her world to truly get it. But that night didn't just fade. It stayed with me, like a splinter under the skin. Small, but irritating enough to keep reminding you it's there. And so I started watching, not with suspicion at first, but with the kind of quiet attention you give to something you're trying to understand. I didn't want to believe she was cheating. I wanted to believe that it was me, that I was paranoid, insecure, maybe even losing touch. But the longer I looked, the more things stopped making sense. I started rewinding moments, like flipping back through a film and seeing the frames you missed the first time. It had started subtly. A few months back, she started talking about building her personal brand, said she was focusing on rebranding herself for larger campaigns, better clients. She started attending strategy meetings, usually late, always vague. I'd ask who they were with and she'd wave it off. Just people in the space, she'd say. No names, no details. Then came the change in how she handled her phone. She used to leave it face up on the kitchen counter, buzzing with notifications she barely glanced at. But lately, it was always on silent, face down. She started keeping it with her at all times, bringing it into the bathroom, into the backyard, even taking it into the shower like it needed protection from me. She also changed her passcode. I noticed the day I grabbed it for her during dinner when it started ringing. She used to unlock it with a quick tap, never a second thought. That night, when I handed it to her, she froze. Thanks, she said quickly, snatching it back before I could glance at the screen. The screen flashed Face ID failed before she turned away. New code, I asked casually. She nodded, didn't look at me. Security stuff. You never know these days. It was such a throwaway explanation that I almost let it go. Almost. Then there were the trips. She began saying she was visiting her friend Mara more often, grabbing wine, doing brand visioning, whatever that meant. But Mara and I have known each other for years, and when I ran into her at the grocery store one afternoon, I casually mentioned Olivia's visit. Mara blinked. Visit? Yeah, I said. She said she was at your place Tuesday night. Mara tilted her head. I was out of town Tuesday. She smiled after that, awkwardly. Maybe she meant another day. Maybe. That night, Olivia came home with a paper bag from a fancy boutique. Gift from Mara, she said. Aromatherapy candles. She pulled one out and placed it on the coffee table. I stared at the label. Imported, expensive, not Mara's taste at all. Another time, Olivia came back from one of her development meetings with a new scarf, navy silk, patterned, the kind that didn't scream her. When I leaned in to kiss her cheek, I caught a scent that wasn't her usual perfume. Something muskier, heavier, masculine. I didn't say anything, just stepped back. And her clothes. That shift came quietly too. She used to wear comfortable things at home, hoodies, sweats, soft cotton t-shirts with puns or brand slogans from past gigs. Then came the sudden pivot. Fitted blazers, pencil skirts, new heels that I'd never seen in our closet before. Some still had tags. The price tags startled me. I'd check the bank statement and the purchases would be split up, disguised between grocery runs or marked as consulting tools. She called them investments in her image. Clients like polish, she said. It's part of the industry. She was making more effort, but not for me. Her body language shifted too. Olivia was always physical. She used to ruffle my hair when I was on the couch, lean her head on my shoulder while we watched reruns, wrap her arms around me in the kitchen while dinner simmered on the stove. All of that disappeared. There were no more casual touches. No hand brushing mine as she passed. No random hugs. She didn't even sit next to me anymore. She started choosing the farthest cushion on the couch. Phone in hand, eyes locked on the screen. And when we did talk, it was with the kind of hollow courtesy you give a stranger in an elevator. How was your day? She'd ask. Fine, I'd reply. Yours? Busy, she'd say. You know how it is. Then she'd retreat. Into her laptop, her phone, the locked bathroom door. I started listening for the shower. She took them late now, sometimes past midnight. Long, steamy showers that lasted 30 minutes or more. Even on nights she hadn't gone anywhere. She'd come out wrapped in a towel, skin pink from the heat, not meeting my eye. Sometimes she'd change in the bathroom and come out already in bed. I'd ask if something was wrong, and she'd say, no, just tired. Always tired. We used to eat dinner together even on busy days. But now she'd say she already ate, or she wasn't hungry, or she had a call. More often than not, I ate alone, scrolling through takeout menus and wondering if I'd missed something obvious. And then there were the objects. Little things. Unexplainable things. A new set of wine glasses appeared in our kitchen, fancy ones with etched stems. I never saw a receipt. When I asked, she said they were a gift from a client. A pair of cufflinks in the junk drawer, silver, clearly expensive. She said they were her father's, though I knew for a fact her dad had passed when she was in high school and never wore French cuffs. A gift bag tucked under the bed, glossy black with a cologne sample inside, the same scent I'd caught on her scarf. I got it from an event, she mumbled when I asked. She never wore cologne before. Never attended anything cologne would be handed out at. I didn't press. I wasn't ready to press. Because if I did, I'd have to admit what was happening. Her phone was the biggest giveaway. She started smiling at messages. Not the kind of smile you give to work updates, the kind you give when someone flirts. The kind of smile I hadn't seen aimed at me in months. And yet, every time I walked into the room, she'd close the app, or swipe it away, or tilt the screen just slightly, like some unconscious defense mechanism. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it, that I'd become one of those guys, paranoid, snooping, insecure. But then I'd see her clear her notifications. She never used to do that. I'd hear her typing, laughing softly, and when I asked what was funny, she'd just say, oh, nothing, just a meme. She stopped showing me the memes. The int asterisk Macy that had once glued us together had evaporated. And yet, the distance didn't come with fighting. No screaming matches. No slammed doors. Just detachment. Like she was already living in another dimension, and I was watching her through a screen. At night, I stared at the ceiling and rewound our life, looking for the first crack. The first missed cue. Was it last summer, when she started staying out just a little longer with her coworkers? Was it that weekend she went to Charleston with a friend, and I never saw one picture, not even a story post? Was it when she started calling me babe less and hey more? Or had it been earlier than that? Something deeper that neither of us saw coming? Whatever it was, I was starting to see it now, and I couldn't unsee it. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't shout. It whispers, slowly, softly, in familiar tones. It wraps itself in normalcy and waits for you to catch up. And I was finally catching up. The confirmation didn't come with shouting. It didn't come with lipstick on a collar or a dramatic confession. Came on a Tuesday, a completely ordinary Tuesday. I was finishing up a report around 6:30 p.m. when Olivia called. She said she was at a corporate event at the Harbor Lights Hotel. Some kind of brand mixer, sponsored by a regional firm she'd been trying to impress. Her voice sounded calm. Too calm. Smooth in that careful way people use when they're reading from a script in their head. Just wanted to check in, she said. It might run late. Okay, I replied. Have fun. Fun. The word tasted strange. We talked for maybe 30 seconds more. She asked about my day. I asked about the turnout. Then she said she had to go and that she loved me. But she didn't hang up. At least, I don't think she meant to. There was a muffled shuffle. Fabric moving. The distant hum of music and clinking glasses. I almost said her name again, but something stopped me. Then I heard a man's voice. Low, confident, amused. Did he buy it? Olivia laughed. Not the polite laugh she used in public. The real one. The int asterisk mate one. Of course he did, she said. He always does. My stomach dropped. There was a pause. Then the man again. You're getting too good at this. Another laugh. Softer. Then, clear as glass breaking in a quiet room. He still thinks that night at the club was about networking. And then I heard it. The sound of a kiss. Not quick. Not accidental. Slow. Certain. Familiar. I don't remember hanging up. I don't remember breathing. I just remember staring at my phone, waiting for my brain to reject what it had just processed. But it didn't. Something inside me went still. Not explosive. Not dramatic. Just still. For weeks, I had been chasing suspicions, interpreting signs, trying to convince myself I was misreading the room. Now there was no room left to misread. Still, I didn't confront her. Not that night. When she came home around midnight, she looked radiant, slightly flushed, eyes bright. She slipped off her heels at the door and walked in like nothing had shifted in the universe. How was your night? She asked casually, placing her clutch on the console table. Fine, I said. She nodded. Mine was productive. Productive. She leaned in to kiss my cheek. I didn't move away. I didn't lean in either. I just stood there. If she noticed, she didn't say anything. Later that night, she fell asleep on the couch while scrolling through her phone. It slipped from her hand onto the cushion beside her. Unlocked. I stared at it for a full minute before picking it up. I wish I could say I hesitated because I respected her privacy. But the truth is, I hesitated because I knew once I looked, there was no going back. Her messages were still open. At the top of the screen was a thread pinned above the rest. No name, just a single black heart emoji. I opened it. The first thing I saw was a selfie. Olivia, in a hotel bathroom, smiling into the mirror, wearing the dress she had on that night at Harbor Lights. The timestamp was from an hour earlier. Under it, his reply, worth the wait. My throat tightened. I scrolled. There wasn't just one man. There were several threads. Different names. Different tones. Some flirtatious. Some explicit. Some casual like this was a recurring hobby she had mastered. There were hotel room numbers. There were *TS of calendar schedules labeled as meetings. There were inside jokes about lies she'd told me. One message read, "Anniversary dinner was cute, but I kept thinking about last week. Last week. Our anniversary." I scrolled further and found a photo that made my hands start shaking. It was our bedroom, our lamp, our sheets, our headboard. Olivia standing in front of the mirror, wearing lingerie I had never seen before. The timestamp was from the night she told me she was at an out-of-town seminar. The caption she sent with it read, "Wish you were here instead of him." Instead of him. I felt something collapse inside my chest. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Clarity. This wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional confusion. It wasn't one bad decision or a moment of weakness. It was a system. Planned. Layered. Organized. She had alibis. She had backup alibis. She had multiple men, each existing in their own compartment. And at home she had me, the stable husband, the spreadsheet life, the man who apologized when she disrespected him in public. I kept scrolling. Voice memos, photos, confirmations of flights that never existed. *TS of Uber receipts labeled as client dinners. One of the men had sent her money. Another had bought her jewelry. Another talked about when you finally leave him. When you finally leave him. So this wasn't just a thrill. I locked the phone and placed it back exactly where I found it. She shifted slightly in her sleep but didn't wake. I stood there in the dim light of the living room and looked at her. She looked peaceful, like someone with nothing to hide. And that was the most painful part. Not the physical betrayal. Not even the lies. It was how easily she lived two lives without cracking. How effortlessly she played the role of wife while building an entirely separate reality in parallel. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed. Everything felt foreign. The house, the air, the future. I had spent weeks questioning myself, wondering if I was insecure, controlling, imagining things. But now there was no room for doubt. The proof wasn't emotional anymore. It was documented, timestamped, archived. And strangely, the certainty didn't make me explode. It made me quiet, because once you know, you stop searching. And once you stop searching, you start deciding. That night, I didn't sleep. I just watched the ceiling until morning, replaying the sound of that kiss over and over again. It wasn't loud, but it was final. I didn't confront her. I didn't scream, throw the phone, or ask for explanations. I didn't flip the coffee table, cry in the shower, or call a friend to vent. I did nothing, and somehow, nothing felt more powerful than anything else I could have done. The next morning, she acted like she always did, slightly rushed, slightly distracted. She poured her usual oat milk into her coffee and asked if I wanted eggs. I nodded. She made them just the way I liked, which almost made me laugh. That morning, I realized something I never wanted to admit. She didn't act like someone hiding something. She acted like someone sure I wouldn't look. That was the most disturbing part. Not the cheating, not the lies, not even the photo in our bedroom. It was the ease, the confidence, the certainty that I wouldn't do anything about it. And for a while I didn't. I started watching her the same way you observe a stranger on a train, quiet, deliberate, collecting data. I took notes in my mind. The new phrases she used when she texted someone, the subtle inflections in her voice when she was lying. I memorized patterns, tracked departures and arrivals, observed her client meetings, and how they coincided with weekends she claimed were for solo content creation. Every time she left the house, I noted what she wore, how much effort she put in, how long she spent checking herself in the mirror. Not the kind of glance you give when you're seeing girlfriends, but the detailed kind, the almost romantic preparation of someone about to be seen. Her lipstick color changed depending on who she was texting. Her perfume rotated in sync with the time of day. Mornings? Light, floral. Evenings? Deeper, muskier. She started wearing earrings to run errands. She carried heels in her tote bag when she left in sneakers. And when she came home, she always had an excuse ready, not practiced but preloaded. The kind of lie that gets so familiar you stop thinking of it as a lie. One Saturday afternoon, she said she was going to the spa. Told me she booked a 2-hour massage and a facial. I said, "Sounds nice," and went back to watering the plants. Then I checked the car's mileage before she left. When she got back, the numbers didn't add up. She hadn't gone north toward the spa. She'd driven west, toward the interstate. And she came back with perfect makeup and dry hair. I said nothing. That was how our house started to feel like a theater. She played her role well, asked about my day, sent me memes, occasionally brought home pastries from a bakery she knew I liked. But there was no *Macy behind the gestures. No warmth. It was like she was preserving the illusion not out of guilt but for optics. And I played along. I didn't smile, but I didn't frown. I didn't touch her, but I didn't pull away either. I existed in a new role, the silent observer. And in that silence, something shifted between us. She noticed not immediately but gradually. She noticed that I stopped initiating anything, that I no longer asked where she was going, that I didn't react when she spent hours at the studio without any content to show for it. She started testing me, mentioning men's names I didn't know, waiting for a reaction. I gave none. She floated the idea of traveling alone for workshops. I told her I hoped it helped. I was giving her rope, not to trap her, just to see how far she'd go if no one stopped her. There's something interesting about people when they think they're not being watched. They become real, unfiltered, lazy in their lies. And Olivia, she was no exception. Her texts became sloppier. I'd glance over her shoulder when I passed by, and I'd catch fragments. Same room as last time. Missed your voice today. He's acting weird, but he won't say anything. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me, not with guilt, with calculation, like she was trying to determine just how much I knew. And what baffled me was that even with all the evidence she'd left behind, even after getting caught in her own slip-ups, she still behaved like someone who assumed immunity. Maybe it was arrogance. Maybe it was experience. Or maybe she simply believed I loved her too much to walk away. In the evenings, I started going on long drives. I'd tell her I needed air, or that I was meeting a coworker for coffee. I wasn't. I'd just park somewhere quiet and sit in my car with the engine off. Sometimes I'd listen to old voicemails from her, from the time when her voice sounded different. Back then, she said things like, "I couldn't wait to hear your voice today," or "You're the best part of my week." Now she mostly said, "I'll be late," or "Don't wait up." I never waited up. Not anymore. She began asking if everything was okay. First I'd nod. Then I'd shrug. Eventually I just stopped answering. Our silence became mutual, not aggressive but functional. The kind of silence that forms when two people are sharing space but not sharing life. She stopped trying to kiss me goodbye. I stopped looking up when she left the room. One night, she came into the bedroom wearing something she used to wear in better times. A silky black nightgown with a lace trim. She leaned against the doorframe, watching me. "You okay?" she asked, voice softer than usual. "Yeah," I said, not looking up from my book. She lingered a moment, then turned and walked out. That was the last time she tried. She must have sensed something was unraveling. But to her, it probably felt like a cooling-off period, not a point of no return. Maybe she believed it was a rut we'd get out of, that I just needed space. But it wasn't space I needed. It was distance. I stopped wearing my wedding ring. I didn't hide it. I just stopped putting it on. I left it in the bathroom tray where she could see it. She never mentioned it. And yet, she continued to behave like nothing was fundamentally wrong. She cooked occasionally. She laughed at shows we used to watch. She even sent me a playlist one day, said, "Reminded me of us." I didn't respond, because there was no us anymore. There was me, and there was her. And then there was the version of us we performed. I started recording things. Quietly. Dates, timelines, **TS. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't planning a dramatic confrontation. I was preparing for an exit. I stopped reacting because I was building clarity. And in that clarity, I saw her more clearly than I ever had. I saw how much effort she put into maintaining the illusion of normal. I saw how confident she was that I wouldn't change. I saw the way she underestimated me, not because I was weak, but because I was quiet. People think silence means surrender. It doesn't. Sometimes it means, I've already made a decision, you just don't know it yet. And I had. I no longer wanted an explanation. I no longer needed her to confess. I didn't want her apology. I didn't even want closure. Because the truth was no longer a puzzle. It was a wall I'd walked into. I knew what was on the other side. And all that was left now was whether I wanted to keep standing in front of it. And I didn't. The strange thing about emotional collapse is that it doesn't feel dramatic. There's no explosion. No shattered plates. No screaming in the driveway. It's quieter than that. It's the moment you wake up next to someone and feel nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Not even resentment. Just absence. That's where I found myself. After weeks of watching, documenting, observing, something inside me shifted from pain to clarity. And clarity is colder than heartbreak. Heartbreak still hopes. Clarity does not. I used to look at Olivia and see history. I'd see the girl who spilled coffee on herself during our first date because she was nervous. The woman who cried when we signed the papers for our first house. The one who squeezed my hand during thunderstorms even though she pretended she wasn't scared. Now when I looked at her, I saw someone else entirely. A roommate. A stranger who knew my routines. Someone who moved through my house like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. The house itself started feeling unfamiliar. Same walls. Same couch. Same kitchen island where we used to sit and talk about nothing for hours. But the energy changed. The air felt heavier. Like everything in it had been exposed to something corrosive. I stopped sleeping in the middle of the bed. I drifted toward the edge without realizing it. We stopped touching entirely, not out of tension, but because there was no instinct left to reach for her. One night, she rolled toward me in her sleep. Her arm brushed mine. My body recoiled before my brain caught up. That's when I understood something final. Love hadn't vanished in a single moment. It had dissolved. Slowly, quietly, like sugar in water. I had spent weeks trying to decide whether I was strong enough to confront her. Whether I should demand explanations, force accountability, break the illusion wide open. But the truth was, I didn't want to fight for something that already felt dead. And that realization hurt more than any message I'd read. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was architectural. She had built an entirely separate life inside the framework of ours. Separate conversations. Separate desires. Separate emotional investments. And the most painful part? She functioned effortlessly in both. She'd sit across from me at dinner, ask about my workload, nod thoughtfully, then excuse herself to take a quick call, and disappear into the hallway to whisper into her phone. She didn't tremble. She didn't hesitate. She lived two realities without friction. Meanwhile, I could barely breathe in one. I stopped imagining a future with her. That shift was subtle but seismic. Before, even in anger, I'd still think in terms of we. Should we go to therapy? Can we rebuild? What would we tell people? Now my thoughts started forming differently. Where would I go? How quickly could I leave? What do I actually need? I began mentally separating our lives. The bank account, the mortgage, the furniture, the framed photos on the hallway wall. I realized how much of my identity had been wrapped in the idea of being her husband. Reliable, stable, supportive. But what was I supporting? A lie? And once you see that clearly, you can't unknow it. There was a specific moment that crystallized everything. It was a Sunday afternoon. Quiet. Overcast. She was in the kitchen making tea. I was at the dining table pretending to read. She hummed softly to herself. The same tune she used to hum years ago when she was happy. I watched her move around the kitchen. Confident. Calm. Untouched. And I realized something that made my chest tighten. She wasn't afraid of losing me. Not even slightly. There was no desperation in her behavior. No urgency to repair anything. No panic in her eyes. Why? Because in her mind, I was constant. predictable, safe. I was the part of her life that didn't require maintenance. And that realization broke something deep inside me. Not because I wanted her to panic, but because I understood then that she believed I would endure anything, that I'd always choose preservation over self-respect. And I had been, until now. That afternoon, I went into the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked older than I remembered. Not physically, just worn, like someone who had been shrinking quietly. I tried to imagine staying. Staying meant accepting a version of marriage that was hollow. It meant living in a house where truth didn't matter. It meant waking up every day next to someone whose loyalty was conditional. And suddenly, the fear of leaving felt smaller than the fear of staying. That was the rupture. Not explosive, not loud, just a shift in gravity. The moment when love stopped outweighing self-preservation. I stopped feeling jealous. I stopped feeling betrayed. I stopped even feeling curious about who she was seeing. Because once someone crosses a certain line, and then keeps walking, they stop being your partner. They become a lesson. That night, she tried to talk to me. "Are we okay?" she asked gently. The question would have gutted me weeks earlier. Now it sounded almost clinical. "I don't know," I said honestly. She studied me for a moment, maybe searching for anger, maybe waiting for an accusation. I gave her neither. She nodded slowly. "You've been distant." I almost laughed. Distant. As if distance was the crime here. "I've just been thinking," I replied. "About what?" I looked at her then. Really looked. And I realized I no longer needed her to understand. "About everything," I said. She held my gaze a second longer, then looked away. And that was it. No dramatic confession. No breakdown. Just two people standing in the same room, already living separate lives. That night, I lay awake and finally admitted something to myself. The marriage was over. Not legally, not publicly, but internally. And once something ends internally, the rest is logistics. The strange part was that the clarity brought calm. The anxiety that had been eating at me for weeks disappeared. Because uncertainty was gone. The doubt had been worse than the truth. Now I knew. And knowing meant I could act. I didn't hate her. Hate would have required emotion. What I felt instead was detachment. Like watching someone pack their own bags in slow motion. Love hadn't disappeared in flames. It had evaporated. And in its place was something colder. Acceptance. I had spent years believing commitment meant endurance. That staying was strength. But I was starting to understand something different. Sometimes strength is walking away from the place that slowly erased you. And I was done being erased. The strange thing about emotional collapse is that it doesn't feel dramatic. There's no explosion. No shattered plates. No screaming in the driveway. It's quieter than that. It's the moment you wake up next to someone and feel nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Not even resentment. Just absence. That's where I found myself. After weeks of watching, documenting, observing, something inside me shifted from pain to clarity. And clarity is colder than heartbreak. Heartbreak still hopes. Clarity does not. I used to look at Olivia and see history. I'd see the girl who spilled coffee on herself during our first date because she was nervous. The woman who cried when we signed the papers for our first house. The one who squeezed my hand during thunderstorms even though she pretended she wasn't scared. Now when I looked at her, I saw someone else entirely. A roommate. A stranger who knew my routines. Someone who moved through my house like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. The house itself started feeling unfamiliar. Same walls. Same couch. Same kitchen island where we used to sit and talk about nothing for hours. But the energy changed. The air felt heavier. Like everything in it had been exposed to something corrosive. I stopped sleeping in the middle of the bed. I drifted toward the edge without realizing it. We stopped touching entirely, not out of tension, but because there was no instinct left to reach for her. One night, she rolled toward me in her sleep. Her arm brushed mine. My body recoiled before my brain caught up. That's when I understood something final. Love hadn't vanished in a single moment. It had dissolved. Slowly, quietly, like sugar in water. I had spent weeks trying to decide whether I was strong enough to confront her, whether I should demand explanations, force accountability, break the illusion wide open. But the truth was, I didn't want to fight for something that already felt dead. And that realization hurt more than any message I'd read. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was architectural. She had built an entirely separate life inside the framework of ours. Separate conversations, separate desires, separate emotional investments. And the most painful part? She functioned effortlessly in both. She'd sit across from me at dinner, ask about my workload, nod thoughtfully, then excuse herself to take a quick call and disappear into the hallway to whisper into her phone. She didn't tremble. She didn't hesitate. She lived two realities without friction. Meanwhile, I could barely breathe in one. I stopped imagining a future with her. That shift was subtle but seismic. Before, even in anger, I'd still think in terms of we. Should we go to therapy? Can we rebuild? What would we tell people? Now my thoughts started forming differently. Where would I go? How quickly could I leave? What do I actually need? I began mentally separating our lives. The bank account, the mortgage, the furniture, the framed photos on the hallway wall. I realized how much of my identity had been wrapped in the idea of being her husband. Reliable, stable, supportive. But what was I supporting? A lie? And once you see that clearly, you can't unknow it. There was a specific moment that crystallized everything. It was a Sunday afternoon, quiet, overcast. She was in the kitchen making tea. I was at the dining table pretending to read. She hummed softly to herself, the same tune she used to hum years ago when she was happy. I watched her move around the kitchen, confident, calm, untouched, and I realized something that made my chest tighten. She wasn't afraid of losing me, not even slightly. There was no desperation in her behavior, no urgency to repair anything, no panic in her eyes. Why? Because in her mind, I was constant, predictable, safe. I was the part of her life that didn't require maintenance. And that realization broke something deep inside me. Not because I wanted her to panic, but because I understood then that she believed I would endure anything, that I'd always choose preservation over self-respect. And I had been, until now. That afternoon, I went into the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked older than I remembered. Not physically, just worn, like someone who had been shrinking quietly. I tried to imagine staying. Staying meant accepting a version of marriage that was hollow. It meant living in a house where truth didn't matter. It meant waking up every day next to someone whose loyalty was conditional. And suddenly, the fear of leaving felt smaller than the fear of staying. That was the rupture. Not explosive, not loud, just a shift in gravity. The moment when love stopped outweighing self-preservation. I stopped feeling jealous. I stopped feeling betrayed. I stopped even feeling curious about who she was seeing. Because once someone crosses a certain line and then keeps walking, they stop being your partner. They become a lesson. That night, she tried to talk to me. "Are we okay?" she asked gently. The question would have gutted me weeks earlier. Now it sounded almost clinical. "I don't know," I said honestly. She studied me for a moment, maybe searching for anger, maybe waiting for an accusation. I gave her neither. She nodded slowly. "You've been distant." I almost laughed. Distant. As if distance was the crime here. "I've just been thinking," I replied. "About what?" I looked at her then. Really looked. And I realized I no longer needed her to understand. "About everything," I said. She held my gaze a second longer, then looked away. And that was it. No dramatic confession. No breakdown. Just two people standing in the same room, already living separate lives. That night, I lay awake and finally admitted something to myself. The marriage was over. Not legally, not publicly, but internally. And once something ends internally, the rest is logistics. The strange part was that the clarity brought calm. The anxiety that had been eating at me for weeks disappeared. Because uncertainty was gone. The doubt had been worse than the truth. Now I knew. and knowing meant I could act. I didn't hate her. Hate would have required emotion. What I felt instead was detachment, like watching someone pack their own bags in slow motion. Love hadn't disappeared in flames. It had evaporated, and in its place was something colder. Acceptance. I had spent years believing commitment meant endurance, that staying was strength. But I was starting to understand something different. Sometimes strength is walking away from the place that slowly erased you. And I was done being erased. One morning, I quietly packed a backpack, laptop, documents, a few clothes. No goodbye speech, no drama, just movement. Olivia was still asleep when I left. I paused at the door, wondering if I owed her a final word. I didn't. I slipped my ring into the junk drawer, shut the door behind me, and drove until city turned to fields. I ended up in a small Idaho town with no plan other than distance. Rented a room, set up remote work. I didn't tell anyone where I was. Not yet. For the first time in years, I felt like I could hear myself think. There was no confrontation, no explosive ending, just silence. And in that silence, I started to feel whole again. A few days later, Olivia messaged me. She was pregnant, said it was mine, that we could start over. I stared at the screen, feeling nothing. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. Trust had died long before that night in the club. You can't rebuild something on broken ground. I told her I wasn't coming back. Some decisions are final not because of hate but because of clarity. Leaving wasn't weakness. It was the only honest thing I had left.